Untap Upkeep Draw. It's the words heard around the world to start every game, besides maybe like good luck and have fun. Such simple words bring the game to start. In chess, the first moves dictate the opponent's response and their defensive choices. The Italian, the Sicilian, the Slav defense. Infamous quotes such as start off on the right foot. The secret of getting ahead is getting started, and every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. In any case, we don't give enough thought into our first steps, and today I think we're going to kind of go over that a little bit.
Welcome back to Midweek, guys. I'm Maddie, your host, and I've got Chris here, my lovely co-host. What's going on, man?
What's going on? Not too much.
Before we get into it, any new crazy deck ideas or anything you're brewing that you want to talk about?
Zula Doc.
Did you order the cards yet?
No, I'm not going to order the cards anytime soon. My buddy from work wants to play,
Okay.
and he plays big dinosaurs, and I told him, you should play this deck. So I sent him the deck over. He's like, yes. So he may be joining us one of these Sundays. We'll see. I need to build it, show him how to play it, and then have him come out. And I think it'll be fun.
That sounds great. It'll be cool to look. You got the point of map. He shows up. So besides
We'll
that,
see.
I've got my weird Jess Guy modular deck. I've got it's Pirates or it's Captain America.
Sure. I think Captain America is incredibly good. How has that deck
so
been
fun.
feeling for you?
Like we were talking about it a couple of weekends ago, or Fridays ago. Having a sync in the command zone is so great because man, I can drop infinite mana. What do we do with it? I don't know. I don't have anything to do other than on board. I'll play my commander and I can just throw lightning gleaves at you. I can throw skull clamp. I can throw whatever I want and kill you. But if I have the mana, I can do whatever I want with it. But I don't need that card draw like some decks. As we get into it, before anything starts, even before we start a game, there's always decisions and pre-planning and mental gymnastics that we have to do.
How do we start choosing the right deck? What are all the different choices that are going into it? 50% of your decisions happen before you even sleeve up your cards and present your deck to your opponent to cut. So I think there's a lot of nuances and a lot of things that happen well before untap, upkeep, and draw actually even happen. So some of the things that I like to go over is what kind of deck do you normally choose? Like for a certain meta, for example, we were talking earlier, Dallas. Anytime that I've got a Dallas 60 card format, I have to prepare against burn.
Mhm.
I have to prepare against burn. I know it's going to be there. So what's my sideboard going to have? Am I going to main board against it? Maybe, maybe not. In CDH, we really don't have a sideboard. So what cards with silver bullets do I need to survive against a specific deck that I know is going to be prominent either in the top 16 or the Swiss?
This happens before we get even into the game itself. Is you have to break it down to what do you want to play, how are you going to play it, what do you have to prepare against, and then what do you have to realize I'm weak against this. How do I shore up against it? Like there's some decks that you have to understand you're always going to lose against because not lose against. You're always going to be at disadvantage because that's what the deck does. Take a tier grid deck. You don't want to play against that one where you're playing Niv Mizzet drawing 1,000 cards when they can make you discard 1,000 at the same time and they get all your tournaments. So you get weird things like that, and that's something that I would love to go over today with you. Is me and you decided 5 questions to ask each other. So kind of general questions like what are your thoughts and everything. So we'll go over that and let's get into it, Chris. Do you want to start?
Sure. My first question for us is, how do you choose a deck? Like, how do you feel good about a deck? Like, is there a ritual? Do you get like a rabbit's foot, rub it on the deck, and like, cool, now it feels lucky? Like, what is your preparation for picking a deck for an FNM, for a Sunday, for a tournament? What do you do?
So I'm gonna be a little bit weirdo here. I have about 4 decks in rotation, which you know that. But I locked down about 3 that I rotate pretty hard through. But when I'm coming to play Sunday, I chill myself. I'm gonna play this deck for sure first, and then I'll play this one if I lose. But if I keep winning, I'll stay on that deck. But if I lose, I gotta go to the next deck. It just kind of is that mentality of okay, I gotta get reps in. But then you said like the tournament. I enjoy tournaments just to go to them. Like I want to win no matter what, but I'm enjoying to have fun too, just at the tournament. Um, So lately, it's kind of just been taking what I enjoy and what's having fun. But I kind of do an early New Year's resolution. Any tournament I go to for the next 6 months, I'm going to be taking probably a top deck, like taking
Okay.
TNT or Rocco, something that I know has results, can put up results, and I know I can play it well. That's definitely
Yeah.
something. What about you? What's something you look at before you choose a
So I am the statistics man apparently in our
deck?
group. So I look at tournaments from the 2 month, the 3 month before. Like Colorado's coming up with a tournament, and I might honestly look back and say, "Cool, what is the overall feel of the majority of the people?" Okay, they are going turbo. It will normally be like pretty prominent. Is it overall okay? Is it like what decks were played well or what decks were built well? Like, okay, well, for
Hmm.
example, one of the tournaments I went to, I looked at and said, all these kid decks are built wrong. Oh, okay. I know this deck can perform a lot better in a good pilot's hand. And once again, there is a lot of RNG, but what do you feel good about in general? So I really look at the statistics and I look at the feel of the meta as a whole. What's likely to be brought? Now, if I can't figure out what's going on, I try to figure out what's the most popular decks right now. I mean, TNT is one of those. How do I attack that deck? Well, there's a couple different ways that you can attack that deck. Another thing is looking at what people are including considerably. Like for me, at least, if there's going to be a deck, I want to have non-commander centric decks, and then I want to have a commander centric deck. And depending on which way I feel about it, like for example, I definitely have said Drannith Magistrate's going to play more and more, but I haven't really seen Drannith Magistrate at all in the tournaments that I played in and the smaller groups that I played with. I'm like, I don't know where it's at, but it should be everywhere.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely, I agree with that 100%. It's something I know it's there. It's like if you know like a bill's coming, you're like, I know it's there. I have the money. I should just pay it. I know I need to pay it. But you're like, it's not there. I can spend the money, and then the bill shows. You're like, I don't have the money.
Well, that's the thing. At one point in time, I remember playing, and Drannith Magistrate was everywhere. It
Hmm.
was everywhere,
Turn
and I'm
two,
like,
turn one every time. But right there, that's definitely like you said. It's you have these different. You have your statistics, what's popular. But what about well, hey, I enjoy playing Gishath or I enjoy playing Necrobloom deck. That's there's
sure,
those decks that you can see they're technically they can be French. You can make them, but there's something about different mindset of where you're going to play. You're going to play FNM, and there might be some prizes. Play what you want to play. Have fun, and that's and then go to a tournament. Same thing. Play what you want to play. Have fun. But what we're going to talk about is kind of that more competitive mindset, correct? We're going to talk about like what do you look at when you kind of plan for these more generalized events, I guess. Like if
well, well, I suppose. I mean, we were talking the other week about Glarb,
mhm,
right? And that wasn't a deck that I knew that it was doing somewhat well in the meta, but what it really did, I had no idea.
yeah.
Zhengzhou goes all warfare is based on deception, right? So when you really come down to it, sometimes Brewer's Advantage can really get there, and people don't know, or they under expect, like, oh, this is a bad
Oh,
deck. This is
100%. I agree
a
with
Yawgmoth deck,
Brewer's advantage definitely. We saw it with a couple weeks ago when Salt City came out to play with us. Chandler playing his TNT deck, but it was the modern version. It had Yawgmoth, Hepatra, and just had these different lines in there, and it was just pretty cool to see. Or like when I made dungeons, people didn't expect it, and you were
Yep,
able to get under a little bit sometimes. But like I commented before, I wasn't able to climb that last little hump with the dungeon
sure,
deck, so I couldn't confirm it or I couldn't close out the game. But that's like you said, that's something we got to definitely consider. But as we keep rambling here, we could spend all day talking about what decks we choose and why we
yeah,
choose them. But let's
sure.
jump to the next question. I'll ask this time. You sat down, you've chosen your deck, you're playing Cannon or Italian. We'll randomize this. Your seat three, you've got Blue Farm seat one. Seat two, you've got a turbo deck. Seat three is you. And seat
Okay.
four, I don't know. What does your mulligan look like? What are you thinking? What's Kinnon's mulligan?
In that kind of situation, I feel like Blue Farm is definitely going to do a good job of like holding down the turbo deck to an extent. They could also be the aggressor. So, do I want one piece of interaction? I would prefer one piece of interaction. With Kinnan and which deck you pick, sometimes really dictates if you can mulligan well or you can not mulligan well. For example, if your first 7, you open your hand and you're like, cool, not enough lands. Okay, cool. Second 7, you go to it, you have 3 like 5+ drops. That's a mulligan to 4 as is. Like that, cool. I'm going to 6 every time because this isn't good enough. Cool. Go down to 6. Cool. I got one big guy and the other 5 cards are good to go. Cool. Like let's do
bottom.
this, right?
Yeah.
It's essentially a free bottom that otherwise my 7-card hand would have been like 3 dead drops. Maybe one of them would have pitched to force, but either way, like, so certain decks do definitely mulligan better, and I think Kinnan is one of those examples where it does. And there's other decks similar to it that mulligan very, very well. I suppose in that kind of situation, what kind of stops turbo? What kind of turbo deck is it? There's a lot of different things that go into it, but I want 2 lands and mana, and hopefully a piece of interaction. That's what I'm gonna hope for, at least on when I sit down and look at that pod specifically. So I'm gonna ask you the same question. So for mulligan, say you are first seat, you're TNT, and all 3 other seats are blue farm, for example. What's your thought? How do you mulligan? What's going through your mind?
So with that one, the first thing I'm gonna do is I know this TNT deck I've kind of built is that I can shoot it unprotected win turn 2, turn 3 easily. I can mull for that, and I'm fine with going down to a 4+ hand because I can build very quickly with that deck. I can keep a fish, a land, a dork, and something simple, and be good back up to 7 by my back to turn 2. You know what I mean? You've seen it. We've all been there. But with this one, I'd probably mull for an early fish or a Ristic to get that to land, or an Esper even, something that's at least 1 card, because these guys are going to drop a bunch out, and I would probably keep up 1 piece of interaction. I don't think I would shoot for that early win because those are also 3 very controlly decks. So I'm going to also, okay, cool. I know I could probably go for an unprotected turn 2 Thassa's Demonic. I could dig it out, but
Sure.
why would I do that when I can get a fish, fill my hand back up, get all my combo pieces, build a board state, and just win turn 3 protected? When I stop the turn 2 from seat 2, but seat 3 and seat 4, the best part about being seat 1 against 3 blue farms, I'll say right now, is that they're going to control each other a little bit better than I have to. But I also have to be prepared for all 3 of them to turn towards me like a wild dog chase.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
but no, I would probably more of a card advantage hand than anything on that one. Even being seat 1. I would say this, when I talk about tournaments, later game wise, like late day in the tournament, this was like a game 4 or 5 when it was like a winning game, I would probably more aggressively for a turn 1, turn 2 win, because most people are exhausted by that point, and you could slide it through a little bit faster. But that's just a little side note for you. But that's my opinion. But generally, I want to kind of talk about that real quick on mulliganing. Is I would say make sure you always look at who you're playing against. I'm saying you don't have to know every deck in the meta. That's not something we can, even us as players that play every week, we can't even do that. And we check stats constantly. Generally, I would say mulliganing is make sure you're in a comfortable hand. Make sure you're okay with it. You kind of go on curve. That's something you definitely want to do, is curve it out. But you also want to have something as a game plan. Don't just keep a hand because it has 2 great pieces. Well, you can't play those pieces because you don't have A, the color, or B, enough mana. Keep pieces that like you can be in the game, because you want to keep a hand that you're doing something. Even if it's just playing a land dork or land rock, it's something, because a board, doing something on the board is something. I want to always make sure people understand that it doesn't necessarily you're winning, but you're at least going to do something, and it can change the mentality of the game. So I would say, as a general, make sure you have a hand that does something.
That's important. What's turn 1? What am I doing turn 1? What am I doing turn 2? And what am I doing turn 3? Does that help me against these people, or is it too, like, a lot of times when I was playing blue farm back in the day, I'd say this hand's too fair. This hand's too fair. Like it does want turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 thing, but it's not anything exciting. I would much rather give up a turn 1 play to have a more explosive turn 2, turn 3 play any day. And sometimes, once again, knowing your deck really well, swapping between this deck and that deck can hurt people. And that's why sometimes I'll go back to my old favorites and say, I know this deck pretty well, and I know what it does and what it doesn't do that well.
how many times have we watched top 16s that a deck that we didn't even think could dual dock? You talked about just barely earlier today. How often do we see those decks that just come in and slap because people are like, wait, what does that deck do? Wait, what's going on? And it's the same thing I try to do with dungeons. So I get it. Brewer
Yeah.
advantage is something it can take what you think is wimpy and make it a champion. It's so cool, and that's something I enjoy about this format. We talked about hands, like you said, those. What about threats? Like, what is you've sat down? What do you've looked at your hand before you even drawn? What's a threat you have to look at with the decks? You have to plan.
For example, I was playing against a friend of mine, and I got really afraid because he was countering this, he was drawing this card, he was doing all this stuff, but I'm like, hold on. What does his deck actually do? And it was a control stacks-ish deck. His deck has like one or two win cons, and they're pretty convoluted. They're not easy to get to. So sometimes recognizing like this deck is not trying to win anytime soon. Chill, relax, don't fight over everything. Let someone else kind of fight over some stuff. And just like fear is the mind killer, right? You've heard this
Absolutely.
from like Dune and things like that. It's understanding what the tempo is, reading the tempo, and sometimes it takes some experience for sure. Um, but I suppose your biggest enemy when you sit down against those people is yourself. It definitely can be where you are like, I got to answer everything. No, you don't. Does this win the game? Does a Ristic study really? No, cool. I have lands. I'm going to keep drawing lands and playing lands and chilling. Yeah, guess what? I'm not feeding this fish. I don't need to. The game's going to go long because that person's going to control this person. He's going to pop off, and guess who's going to feed the fish? Cool. Feed the fish. He goes to his upkeep, and guess what? He has 12 cards in hand. He's not going to pay for the fish. He's already sculpted his perfect 7. It's all good, you know.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
you don't have to feed him 20 cards to recognize. Okay, sit back, relax, know that my deck is doing its thing and that it can compete, and I don't need to, you know, um, be fearful. So against any meta, I would say that's your biggest enemy is going to be fear and not knowing your deck well enough and what its capabilities are.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. That definitely is a great way to look at it, and that's kind of what I want to cover too. Is being afraid of what's coming. Is like, oh, I got to keep up all 3 pieces of interaction because these decks. Not necessarily. There's 2 other decks that could be answering that too. Like, don't always play the police. Yeah, sometimes you have to. Like, we've all had those players that play the control. We play control decks. You
Yeah,
said Italian. You have to play a little bit more controlly. Yeah, you can do that, but also don't overextend yourself. You're not playing police for 4 players. There's no way. Well, there's decks that can, but there's usually not a way to do that fully without issues. Does that make sense? Like, you're always going to kind of be disadvantaging yourself because you might stop player 3, but player 2 and player 4 are now going to be 2 steps ahead because they didn't have to burn anything, and you have nothing for those. So yeah, that's
correct.
definitely the way I look at threats too. Is don't get into your own mindset on it. Look at the okay, cool. I know that deck. I don't necessarily know the lines perfectly, but I know he doesn't have most of the pieces. I'll let that spell go through. I'll let that go through, and you might let player 3. Oh no, I gotta stop it. Cool. Well, you just burn your counter there. That's fine. It's gonna suck later on, maybe when player 2 tries something, but that happens. You can't
Sure.
control people. But no, that's the way I look at threats too. It's definitely okay, what is this deck going to do? And you brought it up earlier. When I play Rocco, Opposition Agent is definitely in our meta. I have to be ready for that no matter what. And I see one black mana. I always joke, oh, Dark Ritual? And people are like, no. And I'm like, and someone asked me one time, has that ever happened? Well, I've done it before. I've hit someone with a
I have two.
dark Ritual Opposition, and just watching someone's light drain from their eyes is both rewarding and soul crushing at the same time. Like, if it's great, you're like, yeah, I might cut this card now. I got it once. I'm good. I'm good. But no, that's the way I look at threats. You've got your 7 in hand,
Yep.
and you're ready to start the game.
At this point in time, it's untap, upkeep, draw. We've done all of our preparation so far. We picked the deck that we say, this is going to beat the meta. I feel comfortable with this. This does the thing. I know there's opposition agent. I know there's bowmasters, but my deck, I think, is better positioned against those, and I can fight against those things. So now, untap, upkeep, draw.
Let's look at this. How about you define those 3 steps for me, and we'll break it down.
So untap. There's some static abilities that don't let you untap everything. Certain things you can only untap certain things. For example, Winter Moon,
Correct.
I think is the card.
Winter Moon, same one. You only tap up to 2 permanents. It's very much of the restriction, or even your Basalt and your Grim Monolith. or and your mana vault. They are tapped, and you have to pay to untap them. And sometimes it's
Yes.
during certain steps, which is like right here during your upkeep. Mana vault is a prime example of that. We both all play with it. It's that ritual, that colorless mana, and how often we get pinged for it.
I mean, there's definitely been some different cards throughout the years where upkeep, you like, cool, lose 2 life, draw a card on your upkeep, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's certain steps that even though you haven't played a single land yet for that turn, right? There's still things that happen.
Oh yeah,
There's still things that happen, and you still have to be on your game of, oh, wait, I got to draw before my draw step, or I got to pay a life before I draw a step. You know what I mean? And as soon as you get to your upkeep, your opponents can then gain priority and flash something in before you even draw a card,
yeah.
kind of scenario.
That moment you grab priority can change the whole game. How many times has someone brought out a ranger and it sat for 3 turns and someone's forgot about it, but player 3 just searched for 3 pieces? Oh, cool. Well, player 2 is going to pop their ranger at their upkeep because that's when
Really
priority
hard to
becomes
deal
a
with.
thing. But anyway, but you said we got the untap. You go through. When I was looking through it, I found 3 things that stuck out to me: phasing,
Okay.
day and night, and like you said, untapping and untapping, choosing what untaps and what doesn't untap. Those 3
Yep.
are the 3 things that happen no matter what. Even game state doesn't affect those. That as soon as you hit untap, those 3 things get hit by the game. We don't control that. But then we jump to the upkeep where we kept talking about it, priority. That becomes a thing again. It's kind of the main state to what I think the game of CDH is priority. It's what you build stacks of, you build abilities off of, because I hold priority, I stack priority, which we talked about last week, a couple weeks
Yeah.
ago back on Turning Point Meta. Priority is such a backbone of the game. But that's where we get
Yes.
it again. And as you said, you're a little bit more better at defining me. If you want to give, what is the upkeep? What is that phase for me?
It's kind of like the beginning of combat or the pre-combat step. There's always something that kind of like triggers in this one. A lot of people are playing like blue and black, one or two of your most like prominent colors. And whenever I think of upkeep, I think of tutoring in my upkeep to then go to my draw step and draw that thing that I played. Cool. You have vampiric tutor
Yep.
is a huge one. Instant speed, cool. Put anything on top, lose 2 life. Worldly tutor is huge as well. Yes. Heck, even Limdol's Vault, a
Yeah.
card that we've been talking about recently. Cool. I'm going to put the right card on top and then draw. So it definitely has a lot of nuance to it. And sometimes people really don't think about like how much important it is to start off on, the day with your Wheaties. This is your Wheaties. This is your breakfast. Making sure that you are set up right, correct, making sure all your steps are set. You could choose the wrong permanent if there's a stacks piece to untap, and guess what? You're not able to do what you need to do.
Back to that upkeep. You were talking about the
Sure.
nuance and everything. How often, and kind of maybe a slight spoiler to some future content here, costs that come up at upkeep. Cumulative upkeeps. That is
Ooh,
something I
yes.
wanted to cover before we get to draw. Because if you draw and you've missed this, hate to say it, that's a missed trigger, and it can cost you a game. It really
The
can.
whole game, which we'll get into in a
Mhm.
second. But yes, you are 100% right. Cumulative upkeep. Mystic Remora is huge for this. Do we pay? Do we need to keep this thing around? We've already paid 4 mana into it these last couple turns. Do we keep paying mana into it? How long do we do that for?
It's definitely a debate I've had myself. I can pay that, but then I only have 1 mana. But it's also keeping that storm deck down and blue farm. I guess I can do it, and I kept my hand full of 7 the whole time. So that's definitely something you have the mentality of that you have to go through. And well, yeah, you might be able to play anything on your turn, but if you just stop 2 other decks and deck 3 is not really going to do anything, that might be more worth it than anything. That makes sense.
They don't know what's in your hand. And if someone tries to pop off and pay and play 5 spells, guess what? You're drawing 5 cards. They don't know if you have 5 counter spells, but good God, you're probably going to draw 2 in
Well,
that potentially.
you might. My luck, I'm going to draw land, creature. So.
Well, I mean, that, like with all the different quotes that we've had before with Sun Tzu, is, appearing strong when you're weak and weak when you're strong. Having that mentality to be unfazed. Some people are good at it, some people are not. I try to keep and you've talked about it before. You've talked about it before, and you, Nate, have really helped me out with this. When at one point in time, whenever I had to interact, what would I do? I always go, Okay. And you guys told me that. And because of that, now I'm a little bit better off. I'm like, okay, I shouldn't make, such an auditory, like tell,
Sound,
if you
yeah.
will. Yeah, exactly. To tell everyone I don't have anything, or now I have to use my interaction and I was holding off because I was trying to win the game, or
Yeah,
whatever, right? So like keeping your composure in your untap
100%.
upkeep and draw is incredibly important because you can give away a lot of information by I didn't draw the right card, or I didn't, you know, I should not have paid 5 mana for my Mr. Grimora because of this or that. Like your body language, your mood can tell a lot, and just in your untap upkeep draw, there's a lot of things that happen.
Oh,
There's a lot of
absolutely.
things that happen.
It can change. One untap upkeep draw can change the whole game. It can literally. Oh, and we kind of touched on it before. We go into those effects, upkeep. But what about the flip side of that? You have something that Richard Garfield was all about, that cost, that keep that you have to do. And how many times has something, pack of negation, eaten somebody, or pact of slaughter, or slaughter pact, where it's
Yep,
it's those ones that hit people and they're great. Cool, you save the game. You have 3 lands, dog. How you paying for that?
I'm not. I'm
and
not.
and sometimes 100%. Sometimes you have to be willing to go. I'll save the game here. I want to draw, and sometimes you'll get it. It's something that most players that play EDH don't think about. They just untap, upkeep, draw. They just it's one thing. But us EDH players look at it as is split upkeep and draw. We affect those phases because I could stifle that pact because I need player 2 alive because I might run stifle. But
Sure,
also, cool, you die. Um, your end step now is the thing. I flash this in before your draw step. Now when you can't draw, you know what I mean? There's
sure.
things like that that happens, and there's other things, and it's just something that definitely affects the game. And I think I would say it's almost bigger than combat, but combat is so popular known that it's not going to be bigger, if that makes sense. And that's the one thing I love about CDH. I always will, is that we can do more in that one phase than you'll see in a casual game in 2 hours. So,
You could have a whole battle all in your upkeep. Cool. In response, I'm gonna flash in this. No, I'm gonna counter that. Hey, you guys counter this. We'll have 10 different things on the stack, and I haven't even drawn a single card yet.
that the stack is where the game actually plays. Like I think that's like you said right there. You can have like, oh, I have 10 cards here on the stack. Cool. Well, I've held it the whole time. I flash in my pieces and I present a win. While you guys all just
On
burned
top.
interaction on player 2 trying to win on player three's draw phase. Well, you guys just burned everything. I'm gonna do it anyway. And then player three's like, I just want to play a lad and a dork, you guys. So, and
I've done
that's
it.
one.
I've
That's
done
one.
it many times. Yeah.
Oh, and many times, and we've both been that player that's doing nothing. That's got screwed on hands. So it happens. It's all fate of the game. It really is. There's nothing too crazy to it. So
Okay. So we've gone over untap, upkeep. Are you ready for draw?
yeah, there we go. Here we go. Draw.
Okay.
So you've drawn cards in hand. What happens?
I try to pass phases to go to main phase so I can play my land.
You could, but people can interact right here
Sure.
because as soon as you draw, there's multiple lineage trigger. How about Sylvan Library? It says as
That's
soon as
huge.
you draw 2 more cards with it. So
Okay.
you look at the top 3. Well, you draw top 3, and that's why people need to be aware. Smothering Tide and Sylvan Library, cool cards, but against each other, not that great because that 2 mana just became 6. You got that to pay when you look at those 3 cards. So, but you
Sure.
look at those top 3. You're still in that draw step. You haven't. Nothing's changed. You haven't gone to main phase yet, and no one's interacted. Now the card's in hand. Welcome to main phase. You can play your land. Easy as that. Nothing too crazy, but like I said,
Sure.
we have so much that can happen on that draw. Yeah, you draw on that card, but before you leave, player 3 flashes in 3 different creatures that you can't play anything else, only non-artifacts or something crazy. You know what I mean? It happens.
I think that the draw step is more dangerous in other formats than in CDH or EDH for that matter.
Correct. I
The
will
main
agree. I'll agree with that too.
I think it's a lot more dangerous in their formats, and the biggest reason why is because we're only playing singleton format.
Mhm.
I think the draw step is for most formats is incredibly dangerous. Cool, I'm gonna surgical extraction your one of four that's in the graveyard. You just drew that potentially. That's always something that always really comes to me, where it's like this is a unique format where I'm not gonna lose a card in my hand because someone's surgical extraction something.
60 card formats. I got top deck the right card. You have like a 1 in 5 shot to top deck the card because your deck's built that way. And like
Sure.
you said, that's a lot more scary. But as I'm saying, it's kind of cool that we can still interact. Like that is something that takes, I think, the step of EDH, and then there's us, CDH, where we get to interact even on the draw step. Like, oh,
Mm.
cool, you're drawing. Well, I just flashed in a Narset, and you have a one ring, a draw engine. You're not drawing anything else this turn. And I think that's the kind of cool part of like, yeah, like you said, it's not as scary as 60 card, but it's still what can happen during that phase is pretty cool.
A lot of things. With there being 99 cards in three other people's decks, there could be some crazy stuff that we are not ready for. So just kind of always being ready and prepared for the untap upkeep draw is you're not out of the woods yet.
Mhm.
Okay, you're just starting.
It's kind of cool watching people understand that, or even when we get into it later when we talk about other phases too. What about main phase? Well, there's main phase. Well, things trigger in this phase, but not in the second phase. Or we get into
Sure.
combat. There's beginning combat, attack phase, defense phase, damage phase, end of combat. There's things that trigger now, and like there's it's really cool to break it down, and that's something that I hope most players understand. That's all part of Magic itself, but we like to play with each of those steps. Oh, before you leave combat, before you go to main phase, and that's you're gonna hear that a bunch of times. You're gonna hear, oh, you're moving to end step. Cool, I've got something to do. Well, that's a great way to end the show, my man. You guys, if you'd like us to go down a little bit detailed more on our opinions on our different decks that we've been running, let us know down below in the comments. Again, please comment, like, subscribe, and we'll catch you guys next week. Remember to be confident and not condescending. We'll see you later.